in the shadowed vaults of forgotten archives, where dust-choked files guard the whispers of the extraordinary, I unearthed a transcript long buried, sealed away after Edgar Cayce's death in 1945. This was no ordinary reading from the sleeping prophet. It delved into the veiled fates of history's darkest architects, revelations so profound they were deemed too disruptive for the world to hear. What if the soul's journey beyond death exposed truths that unraveled our illusions of justice? As I pored over these suppressed pages, Cayce's voice echoed from trance-induced visions, pulling me into a labyrinth of eternal reckoning. Edgar Cayce, born in 1877 in rural Kentucky, emerged as the 20th century's most enigmatic psychic, a healer, seer, and reluctant oracle who entered deep trance states to access what he called the quote, _zero, an ethereal library of all human experience. For over 4 decades, he delivered more than 14,000 readings on health, history, and the metaphysical, often while asleep, his body limp as his mind roamed unseen realms. Yet, amid this vast legacy, certain transcripts were quietly sidelined, overlooked by scholars and suppressed by those wary of their implications. Why? Because they pierced the veil on death's domain, challenging orthodox views of punishment and redemption. These hidden sessions, conducted in the 1930s amid global turmoil, addressed the unresting souls of tyrants. Visions Cayce received not as moral sermons, but as glimpses into cosmic equilibrium, too unsettling for a war-torn era to confront. Fade to the core of his forbidden insight. In those trance visions, Cayce revealed that no soul perishes with the body, not even the ones stained by unimaginable atrocities. He described a transitional plane, not a fiery abyss of retribution, but a crystalline expanse where the essence confronts its unfiltered essence. Here, in what he termed the Hall of Records, the departed relive their earthly tapestry, not as passive observers, but immersed in the raw sensations of those they harmed. Picture the dictator's iron will crumbling as he inhabits the terror of a shattered family, the anguish of a silenced voice, the void of stolen futures. This isn't vengeance from on high. It's an inexorable unfolding, a psychic echo that forces the soul to embody the chaos it unleashed. Cayce's words, drawn from altered states beyond ordinary consciousness, painted this as the soul's first unmasking, a mirror of lifetimes where excuses evaporate, leaving only the weight of accumulated deeds. As the visions deepened, Cayce's revelations twisted into psychological shadows, amplifying the dread of what lingers after the final breath. He spoke of souls ensnared in limbo, not by divine decree, but by their own unyielding egos, pride-fueled entities trapped in foggy interstices between realms. These stuck levels, as he envisioned them, become prisons of isolation, where the mighty wander in spectral confusion, centuries blurring into an endless loop of self-inflicted torment. For figures like Hitler, whose mania for dominion scarred the world, this state manifests as a relentless internal storm, fear coiling like smoke, loneliness gnawing at the core, all self-generated from a refusal to yield. Cayce's trance insights probe the existential rift, how consciousness, stripped of flesh, grapples with truths it evaded in life, birthing a profound unease. What hidden fractures in our own psyches might await such scrutiny? The prophet's forbidden archives suggest death isn't an end, but a relentless therapist, dissecting the illusions we cling to, forcing growth through the very darkness we sowed. Yet Cayce's visions extended further into the cyclical dance of reincarnation, a mechanism of balance that ensures no debt remains unpaid. even the most shadowed souls he foresaw are compelled to return, not absolved, but bound to mirror their past harms in future forms. A once unyielding leader might awaken as the oppressed, enduring rejection's sting or violence's bite, living the victim's narrative to etch empathy into its core. This law of correspondence, glimpsed in his altered states, operates without malice, pure equilibrium, where resistance only prolongs the spiral. Some souls armored in ego cycle through incarnations of escalating hardship, lives marked by loss, inner voids, and unquenchable unrest, until surrender dawns. Around us, Cayce implied, such entities might lurk, eyes hollow with ancient burdens, repeating patterns until the lesson pierces through. In a speculative extension of his trance-derived wisdom, one ponders if consciousness after death doesn't merely review, but merges with a vast interconnected field, where individual echoes resonate in the collective human tapestry, subtly influencing the living through dreams and intuitions, forever altered by the karmic weave. And so, as these suppressed revelations fade into silence, we are left to wonder, in a universe of eternal mirrors, what unrecognized shadows within ourselves await their turn in the light? I never imagined that the visions of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, held secrets so profound they were buried for decades, whispers of lost souls wandering the veil between lives, interfering with the living in ways that could shatter minds. In 1930s transcripts, smuggled out of his Association for Research and Enlightenment archives, Cayce described a hidden realm where confused spirits latch onto the vulnerable not as demons, but as echoes of unresolved agony. These forbidden readings, suppressed amid fears of hysteria and church backlash, reveal a chilling truth. Your deepest fears might not be yours alone. Edgar Cayce was the man who, from 1901 until his death in 1945, entered trance states to unlock mysteries of the human soul, diagnosing ailments and peering into past lives with uncanny accuracy. Born in Kentucky in 1877, he was no charlatan. Doctors and skeptics alike marveled at his predictions, from stock market crashes to wartime upheavals. Yet his deepest insights into reincarnation and the afterlife were often censored or overlooked. Why? In an era gripped by World War fears, Cayce's visions of souls entangled across lifetimes, some even linking to figures like Adolf Hitler, whose karma he foresaw as a collective reckoning, threatened to upend religious doctrines and societal norms. These suppressed sessions, recorded in dusty ledgers and hidden vaults, were deemed too volatile, too existential, lest they spark panic about unseen influences shaping our world. At the heart of these overlooked revelations lies Cayce's vision of the soul as pure vibrational energy, formless consciousness carrying not memories of events, but raw imprints of emotion, the sting of betrayal, the weight of regret, the haze of forgotten intent. In his trances, he saw this energy persisting beyond death, adrift in a liminal space where purification demands relentless trials. Suffering isn't punishment, Cayce insisted, but the forge of awakening. The soul, eternal and unyielding, evolves slowly, sometimes across millennia, through cycles of pain that strip away illusions until a sudden flash of insight pierces the darkness, like the one we just pondered, where cruelty gives way to inevitable growth. But here's where the shadows deepen. Cayce warned of souls so entangled in their own torment that they reach out, subtly infiltrating the living. Not as Hollywood exorcisms, but as insidious whispers that amplify inner voids. Imagine a person adrift in despair, their spiritual defenses eroded by grief or doubt. Then, like vibrations aligning in the ether, a wandering consciousness attaches. It's partial, psychological. Their thoughts twist, impulses surge unexplained. Eyes that once held warmth now flicker with alien unrest. Those around them sense the shift, unpredictable rages, acts of cruelty without motive. Cayce, drawing from visions of ancient Atlantis and biblical echoes, linked this to the young and empathic, whose porous minds become gateways. Yet, he stressed, these intrusions aren't always malevolent. Some lost souls seek solace, clinging to the compassionate as lifelines, urging them toward mutual release through quiet rituals of light. This pulls us into profound psychological depths. Cayce's philosophy reframed death not as an end, but a threshold where consciousness confronts its fragmented self. In altered states, he glimpsed how these interferences mirror our own buried archetypes. The shadow self, Jung might envy, raging against the collective unconscious. Existential dread mounts here. If a soul's vibration can bleed into yours, what safeguards our sanity? Cayce urged inner fortitude, prayer as anchoring, compassion as shield, warning that unchecked openness invites the abyss. Yet, in this dance of energies, destruction coexists with redemption. The very souls once steeped in evil may reincarnate as beacons, their past horrors fueling selfless quests. Driven by unseen scars, they endure trials, abuse, isolation, as cosmic tests, emerging with a resilience that baffles the observer. Why them? Because as Cayce envisioned, experience isn't a chain, it's fuel. The darkest essence can transmute, but only through willed surrender to healing's fire. And consider this speculative layer, drawn from the thematic undercurrents of Cayce's work. What if consciousness after death doesn't dissolve into void, but fragments into holographic echoes, each splinter seeking reunion with the universal mind? In his suppressed visions, souls might project these shards across the veil, not to possess but to evolve through proxy empathy. Your fleeting intuition of another's pain could be such a bridge, weaving individual awareness back into the infinite whole. So as we sift through these veiled transcripts, one haunting question lingers. In your next encounter that chills the soul, is it chance? Or a forgotten spirit calling across the incarnations, begging for the light only you might provide? In the dim vaults of forgotten archives, sealed away from prying eyes since the 1940s, lies a transcript of Edgar Cayce's most guarded trance session. A revelation whispered in altered states, suppressed by those who feared its power to unravel the veil between worlds. What if the sleeping prophet glimpsed not just the future, but the fractured souls of the damned, pulling them from the abyss with words that could rewrite destiny? I remember the day I first uncovered this hidden recording, tucked among yellowed pages in a dusty Virginia repository, dated 1939, just as shadows of war lengthened across Europe. Edgar Cayce, the humble photographer turned unwilling oracle, born in 1877 and passing in 1945, channeled over 14,000 visions in his lifetime, diagnosing the body and soul alike. But this one? It was buried deep, overlooked by historians, perhaps because it dared to probe the fate of leaders, like Adolf Hitler, whose darkness Cayce saw not as eternal night, but as a soul adrift in limbo. Why hide it? In an era of rising fanaticism, such insights threaten to humanize the monstrous, challenging the black and white narratives of good versus evil. This wasn't prophecy for the masses, it was a forbidden blueprint for redemption, locked away to prevent panic or enlightenment. As the needle scratched across the old phonograph in my mind's eye, Cayce's voice emerged from the ether, his body limp on the couch, eyes closed in that profound trance where time dissolved. He spoke of souls not as fixed entities, but as wandering essences, caught between incarnations, drawn inexorably to the light or the void. In this suppressed session, he revealed the core truth. Ordinary lives intersect with the lost ones, not by chance, but by karmic threads spanning centuries. Imagine it. A murderer in this life, once your ancient ally, now crossing your path to settle an unfinished debt. Cayce's visions painted these encounters as echoes of old tales, repetitions urging resolution, where pain becomes the forge of healing. From there, the trance deepened, pulling us into the psychological maze of consciousness itself. Cayce didn't preach from pulpits, he journeyed through inner realms, emerging with warnings about the soul's fragility. He described how we, the everyday wanderers, with our flaws and fleeting hopes, hold sway over those who've embraced shadow, not through confrontation or judgment, but through the subtle vibrations of our existence, acts of compassion that ripple like unseen waves. In his altered states, he saw souls in limbo, groping for anchors, attracted to lighthouses of sincerity amid their storm. Prayer, he insisted in this lost transcript, isn't rote ritual. It's a raw invocation, pleading not for vengeance against tyrants or betrayers, but for their buried spark to flicker anew. Pray for the one you despise, he reconstructed in trance, and you forge a bridge where hatred once stood. That's the heroism that shifts the unseen tides. Fade to the heart of the revelation, where existential shadows lengthen. Cayce's mind, unlocked in those hypnotic depths, unveiled the mechanics of downfall. Souls who cling to destruction don't burn in flames, but erode like sandcastles against the sea. Their path weighs heavier with each refusal, memories fogging until they're adrift in a self-made isolation, a hell of disconnection from their core essence. Yet even here, the prophet's visions offered a twist of intrigue. Spiritual laws bend toward mercy, unlike rigid human verdicts. The fallen can rise as luminaries, their scars forging empathy no untested soul could claim. And as the session's echoes faded, Cayce touched on something unspoken in prior readings, a speculative glimpse into the afterlife's hidden layers. What if consciousness, severed from the body, doesn't simply linger or ascend, but fragments into echoes that haunt the collective dreamscape? In his trances, he hinted at these shards, embedding in the universal mind, influencing generations subtly, like whispers in the wind, prompting acts of kindness or cruelty without a single soul aware of the source. But what lingers most from this buried archive? The unnerving possibility that no abyss is absolute, that even in disintegration, where the soul scatters into chaotic dust, reincarnating as blind impulses without purpose, a single thread of connection can reassemble the mosaic. Cayce's final trance note, reconstructed from the transcript's margins, warns, quote 5. So as you sit with these words, drawn from suppression to light, ask yourself, whose darkness are you unknowingly illuminating? And what unresolved echo calls you back? I remember the moment I first held that faded envelope in my hands, sealed away in a forgotten corner of the Association for Research and Enlightenment's archives. It was labeled simply, Cayce Reading, 3976-29, confidential, do not distribute. The year was 1941, and Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet himself, had just delivered what would become one of his most controversial visions. But this transcript wasn't meant for the public eye. It was suppressed, buried under layers of institutional caution, for it dared to peer into the shadowed realms of the soul, realms where even the architects of unspeakable evil might find redemption. What if I told you that Cayce's trance revealed not just the afterlife, but a hidden truth about consciousness that could upend our understanding of damnation itself? This is the lost recording we've been denied for over 80 years. To grasp the weight of this discovery, we must step back into the life of Edgar Cayce, the man who bridged the waking world and the unseen. Born in 1877 in rural Kentucky, Cayce was no ordinary mystic. By the early 1900s, he had earned a reputation as America's greatest psychic, entering deep trance states to diagnose illnesses, predict earthquakes, and channel wisdom from what he called the Akashic Records, the ethereal library of all human experience. During the height of World War II, as the world grappled with the horrors of fascism, Cayce's sessions grew increasingly prophetic. He warned of global upheavals, spoke of Atlantis rising from the ocean depths, and delved into the karmic threads binding nations and leaders. Yet this particular reading from 1941 was different. It was conducted in secrecy, at the request of a close associate, fearing backlash from religious authorities and government overseers. Cayce's views on reincarnation and universal salvation clashed with the era's black and white moral crusades. To protect his legacy, and perhaps to avoid accusations of sympathizing with the enemy, this transcript was locked away, overlooked amid the chaos of war and post-war skepticism. It resurfaced only recently through a diligent archivist's chance find, pulling back the veil on Cayce's forbidden revelations about death and the soul's eternal journey. As the needle scratched across the old phonograph record, now digitized from that hidden archive, Cayce's voice emerged, slow and otherworldly, as if echoing from beyond the veil. In trance, he described the afterlife not as a final judgment, but as a vast, luminous cycle where consciousness persists, evolving through layers of light and shadow. He spoke of souls as wanderers, detached from the body's decay, drawn inexorably back to the divine source. But here's the core of what was concealed. Even the most tormented spirits, those steeped in lifetimes of destruction, do not face eternal exile. Cayce envisioned them adrift in a twilight realm, their cries piercing the ether. A signal, he said, not of irredeemable evil, but of profound disorientation. Quote 7. His words reconstructed from the transcript in tone. Quote 8. Drawing from his visions, Cayce revealed that Adolf Hitler, yes, the dictator whose shadow still haunts history, was no exception. In altered states, Cayce perceived Hitler's soul not as a monolithic force of malice, but as a fractured entity, lost in the karmic echoes of past incarnations, crying out for reconnection. This wasn't absolution or excuse, it was a stark warning. Evil in Cayce's cosmology is a temporary veil, a distortion of the light within every being. Suppressed because it humanized the inhuman, this revelation challenged the post-war narrative of absolute retribution, suggesting instead that no soul is beyond the pull of transformation. From this core insight, Cayce's philosophy unfurls like a dream sequence in the dead of night, deepening the psychological intrigue of what lies beyond death. Imagine slipping into one of his trances yourself. The body stills, the mind expands, and suddenly you're navigating inner worlds where archetypes of good and evil blur into archetypes of growth. Cayce often reflected on consciousness as an immortal spark, unbound by time, wandering through symbolic deaths, those moments of ego dissolution that mirror the final passage. In his suppressed interviews, pieced together from fragmented notes, he pondered the terror of that transition. The soul, stripped of its earthly anchors, confronts the hidden truths it evaded in life. For the seeker, this breeds existential tension, a gnawing question: am I truly separate from the darkness I fear? Cayce's visions painted death not as oblivion, but as a psychological reckoning, where suppressed memories flood back like tidal waves. The prophet himself wrestled with this, his health fragile from years of trance-induced strain, often emerging pale and haunted, whispering of the underscore, quote underscore 9 underscore, that demands we face our shadows. In one overlooked session, he described consciousness fracturing upon death, splintering into echoes that must be gathered anew, a process fraught with intrigue, where forbidden knowledge from past lives tempts the unwary soul toward further illusion. Yet through it all, Cayce emphasized choice. In the afterlife's vast expanse, we retain agency, drawn toward light by an innate striving, even as psychological barriers, guilt, denial, rage, create labyrinthine detours. This isn't mere mysticism, it's a profound exploration of the human psyche, urging us to listen to the darkness within, lest it consume us unchecked. Transitioning from these visions, one speculative thread emerges that Cayce hinted at, but never fully charted in his known readings: the possibility that consciousness after death doesn't merely persist, it evolves into a collective resonance, merging momentarily with the universal mind to glimpse infinite timelines. In this state, the soul might relive not just its own history, but absorb fragments from others, fostering an empathetic awakening that dissolves divisions of underscore, quote, underscore 10, underscore versus underscore, quote, underscore 11, underscore thematically aligned with his teachings on reincarnation. This reflection suggests a hidden mechanism for redemption, where even isolated spirits like Hitler's could, in time, attune to this harmony, transforming isolation into interconnection. And so, as the echoes of Cayce's voice fade from this unearthed transcript, we're left with a lingering enigma. If every soul, no matter how shadowed, yearns for the light, what hidden paths in your own consciousness might lead you there or hold you back forever?